Hello viewers, Whidbey Ben here with another helpful tip. If you watched my video on how to clean a Dungeness crab, the next natural step is how to pick one. So today we're going to take this Dungeness crab and I'll show you how to disassemble it and get the meat out of it. Any job is made easier with the right tools. So for this job we're going to need a basic crab picker and a crab cracker. Nothing fancy. You'll also want a clean container to put your picked meat in. And here's our crab. The first step to disassembling a Dungeness crab is to take the two halves and break them apart. You do this simply by twisting along this axis here. So I'm going to show you. We twist it up like that and back down, and now we have two halves. Now let's take a closer look at the anatomy of our crab here. The crab is made out of actually several segments. Here's a segment here, a segment here, a segment here, a segment here, and a segment here. If we flip this over, you'll see here's a segment associated with the big claw, a segment with this, and this, and this, and this. So each claw has its own segment. The muscles for each of these legs lives within each one of these segments. And so it's easier to pick the meat out if we break up the crab into the segments. So let's just concentrate on one half of the crab here. And once you've taken this one half apart, you just repeat the process with the other half. So the first step is to break the crab up into each one of these segments. And we can do that by bending the crab along these little lines here. So we're going to bend here. You can see how that segment comes apart there. Alright, so that's the main claw segment there. We'll do the same thing with the next segment here. Next one after that. And finally the last segment's here. Okay, so now we have broken our crab up into each one of its segments. Now let's address each one of these segments individually here. So let's do the big claw first, since that is obviously a big target. The first thing we do is this joint right here, we're going to separate that from the leg, and we do that by taking the joint here and we bend downwards. We're going to focus on this joint here. We're going to bend downwards and break that joint open. Alright. Now we have the body segment with the joint separated, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our crab pick and we're going to insert it underneath this part here and pull the meat out. So you insert the pick into the joint behind the meat and then just kind of pick the meat out towards you. And what that does is it pulls the meat off of the tendons inside here. And that can go right into our collection container here. Just like that. Alright. And you may have to rotate this around to get the other bits out of that same compartment. But the technique is the same. You insert the pick down and then you sweep the meat towards you off the tendons. The idea is to leave the tendons attached to the joint so that all you get is the meat. And we obviously don't want to throw the shells in with our meat, but anyways, what we see now on the inside of the joint is pretty clean. Got most of the meat out of that. So we're going to toss the shells into our shell bucket. Okay, so the claw section requires special treatment because the shell is pretty thick. So what we're going to do is we're going to break separate this joint here just by bending against its maximum here. And we're going to separate this joint here too, but we're going to need the cracker for this. I use the cracker to get leverage on it like this. I'm not cracking it, but I'm just using leverage. I'm going to bend it backwards to break the joint open. Just like that. And then for the claw itself, we're going to hyperextend the claw here and then just pull it out. Just like that. Alright. So our claw goes into the shell bucket. Now this claw here also requires the cracker. I'm going to put it in the cracker like this, and I'm going to torque it like this towards me to break the shell. Alright, once you've got the shell broken here, if you're lucky you can pull it apart, and you got the little claw thingy there. And then what we do is we go in through this joint here and we push the meat out. So go in through the joint here, push the meat out, and hopefully into our awaiting bucket here. And you may have to come up on the top here, lever that out through the top too. So we've got all the meat pushed out of this claw here. Now this segment here is also pretty hard, so we're going to use the cracker to crack it. And I always prefer to try to minimum amount of cracking because the inside of these shells is lined with a very thin membrane that tends to hold the shell pieces together. And if you use scissors or something else to cut the shell, you'll end up with hundreds of little tiny shell fragments that you'll have to pick out of the meat later. So minimizing the number of cracking is really helpful in decreasing the amount of bone or shell picking you have to do. Now I sometimes will pry this open a little bit, like that. And this is what we call a prize piece here. We can get out all of the muscle in one chunk like that. Okay, moving on to the next segment here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to break off this knuckle here. And sometimes you'll notice there's a little bit of meat attached to the inside of the knuckle here. So that is very easily scooped out, just like that, and into the bucket. Then we do the same thing here. We go in under this shell, sweep up towards the inside of the joint, and pull the meat down towards us. So it's pulling the meat off of the tendons. And there we go, that's pretty clean right there. Now, each of these leg segments we're going to break apart. You do so by applying pressure like this to the joint, and it'll just pop like that. You pull it apart and the tendon remains attached to the segment here, comes out of the meat. Now, I prefer just to crack these shells like that without having to use the cracker, again, to keep the shell fragments to a minimum. And again, we're going to push the meat out from this end here. That piece is coming out nicely. And same for this one here. We're going to push the meat out from this side here. And there we have a nice clean shell and all the meat in here. Oh, I forgot this knuckle piece here from the claw. Same thing with this though. You push the meat out from this side of this corner here. It will rotate out through the big opening here. You have to do some improvising no matter how you do this, but the idea remains the same. Just rotate the big piece of meat out of that opening there. And that pretty much has emptied that piece out. Alright, where were we? Oh, we've still got another claw that we disconnected here. So you're going to bend these joints and break them apart like that. Same thing with the little claw at the very end here. You see how the tendons come out with that? That's kind of nice. And sometimes if you don't have one of these handy, you can always just use this as your pick. So again, with this corner here, we try to push the meat out from this end here. There it goes. And for this segment here, we're just going to crack it. And we're going to push the meat out. Like that. Push the meat out. Like that. And so on and so forth. Now each of these segments is very similar, but you come to the very last segment here. Well, actually the third leg here, the second to last segment. There's kind of a difficult area right here where several muscles all come together in a complex joint here. So in this area here, I find it helpful to grab this little intersection here, this part here, and give that a little twist and pull that off. And what that does is it kind of exposes pull off these little shell segments here. Now it exposes the meat that's been hiding underneath that. And the meat is usually in several triangular compartments, so you just pick the meat out of each triangular compartment. Sometimes it helps to push it from one side to come out the other side, like here. We get this compartment cleaned out. There's another compartment right under it there. Push that out. Again, this segment is associated with that third leg is always the most difficult one to clean out because of the way that all the muscles come together here. And I'm going to break it off with this knuckle here too, just to make it easier to work with. If you push in through that hole there, you can push some of the meat off of the tendons. Come in under the shell here, into the corner, and out the meat pops. So it's just a matter of cleaning out each one of these triangular compartments, getting the meat out. And keep an eye out for any little shell fragments that might end up in your meat bucket there. You'll need to pick those out. Alright, so that's pretty clean there. And then the last segment here, this is called the swimmer flipper here. This is the one segment that you can indulge in. You can actually just suck the meat out of this little elbow here. And the very last segment here, if you break that in half, you can suck the meat out of both of those little segments there. Otherwise, you can do the same thing. You can scoop the meat out of these little segments, but it hardly seems worth it for that little tiny bit of meat there. But anyways, as a picker, I indulge myself and suck these little bits out. But for this video, I'm just going to flip the meat into the bucket here. There's that little swimmer flipper. We'll put that in the shell. Now I'll go ahead and finish up this the rest of this crab here. So generally you're going to go in under the shell here into the center of the joint and scoop the meat out. Just like that. If there's a little bit of meat in the elbow here, you scoop that out. The longer pieces, you just crack them. Push the meat out from the ends. It's another long segment here. This one had a little bit of meat on the elbow. You can see the tendon right here. And I'm just going to push the meat off that tendon. And that goes into our bucket there. Now I'm going to crack it to expose the meat inside. And push this through. Push this one through. The longer pieces, we crack them. Push the meat through. And the little elbows here, I'm going to push the meat through the back here. See how that rotates around like that, and then you can pick it out. And this was actually our second leg here. You can sometimes also grab the shell here and twist it off to expose the meat underneath, like that. But I did drop a little piece of shell in here. I'm going to pick that out of there. Okay, into the knuckle here, pull the meat out. Just like that. Here's that little piece on the knuckle here. Crack that. Try to get a nice choice piece out here. There we go. That's a beauty. Another knuckle. Again, push it out through the back. See how that meat rotates out like that? And a little claw on the end here. All right, now we have converted our crab in the shell into a pile of crab meat, lump crab meat. So you just repeat the process for the other half of the crab and you will have a nice tub full of picked crab bait. So that's how you pick a Dungeness crab like a pro. No need to worry about embarrassing yourself like Daryl Hannah in that scene from Splash. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and hit like. Until next time, bye-bye.